My name is Marissa Vale, and I'm 32 years old. By the time I pulled into the driveway that night, my whole body felt used up. 14 hours on site. People romanticize hard work when they've never had to carry it home in their bones. Construction is weight, heat, dust, repetition. It's hauling materials up unfinished stairs, standing for hours under open sky, and feeling every joint argue with you by the end of the day. When I killed the engine, I stayed there for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the house. The lights were on. The television flickered through the front window. And for one small, foolish second, I felt relieved. Because usually that meant one thing. Dinner. Something hot. Something ready. Not because I expected to be served, but because after a day like that, not having to think for 10 minutes felt like mercy. I got out of the truck, shut the door with my hip, and climbed the front steps slower than usual. My back pulled when I bent to untie my boots. The second I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Garlic, tomatoes, butter, pasta, I thought immediately. My stomach growled so loudly I almost laughed. Finally, I muttered. I kicked off my boots near the door, rolled my shoulder once, and called toward the dining room. Hey! My boyfriend Adrian was sitting at the table with his laptop open. One elbow rested beside the keyboard. A half-empty glass sat near his hand. He looked relaxed in that effortless way people do when they've been home for hours. He glanced up once, just long enough to meet my eyes. You're back. That was all. No smile. No. How was your day? No, you look exhausted. Just, you're back. Yeah, I said. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Almost nothing. A yogurt cup, 2 eggs, mustard, half a lemon drying out in the corner. Not empty, technically, just empty in the way that matters when you're starving. I looked toward the stove. The pan had already been washed. 2 plates sat in the drying rack, still wet. Dinner had been made, just not for me. I turned back toward the dining area. Did you already eat? Yes, Adrian said, still typing. I nodded once. Okay. I could hear the television in the other room, some bright commercial forcing cheer into the air. Did you make pasta? I asked. He sighed like the question itself irritated him. Yes. For yourself? Yes. I waited. Sometimes there were leftovers. Sometimes something got set aside. Not tonight. So I asked the only question left. You didn't make anything for me? That made him stop typing. He leaned back in his chair and finally looked at me. You're an adult, he said flatly. Cook for yourself. For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. What? His expression didn't move. I said, you're an adult. Cook for yourself. Then he added, I don't run a restaurant. The words landed hard. I stood there, too tired to react fast enough. I just worked 14 hours, I said, and hated how thin my voice sounded. He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. And what? You expected me to have dinner waiting when you got home? That's not what I... Play houseboy? He cut in. Is that the role now? My jaw tightened. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. He wasn't yelling. That made it worse. He sounded calm, settled, already convinced I was the unreasonable one. I rubbed the back of my neck, still gritty from the sight. Adrian, I wasn't asking for a performance. I asked if there was food. There isn't. I can see that. Then I'm not sure what the confusion is. I stared at him. He lowered the laptop halfway, just enough to show me I had forced his attention. You know what the problem is? He said. You think because you work all day, everything should orbit around you. I let out a slow breath. I never said that. You didn't have to. You work from home, I said. You were here. His eyes narrowed. And that means I should cook for you? It means you had time. He smiled then, but it was mean. Wow. I was too tired to fight the way he wanted me to. So I said the simplest truth I had. I thought when 2 people live together, they take care of each other. He shook his head. No, that's not how life works. That sentence did more damage than the rest. Because suddenly the night stopped being about dinner. It became about all the small things I had been excusing for months. The way he had stopped asking about my day. The way we no longer ate together. The way weekends had started to feel less like a relationship and more like 2 people splitting space while one of them slowly checked out. I had told myself it was stress, timing, a rough phase. But standing there in dusty work clothes, looking at a man who had cooked a full meal for himself and none for me, I couldn't pretend anymore. He meant it. Not just the sentence. All of it. Fine. I turned without another word, walked back into the kitchen, and opened the pantry. Rice, oil, onions. I took the eggs from the fridge, cut up the last of the vegetables, and set a pan on the stove. Behind me, I heard Adrian shift in his chair. A minute later, his voice drifted in from the dining room. Well, look at that. I kept chopping. You do know how to cook. I didn't answer. The knife moved through onion, peppers, green beans that were just fresh enough to use. The rhythm settled me. Oil in the pan, garlic, eggs, rice. The smell rising from the stove was simpler than what he had made for himself, but it was mine. The hiss of heat, the scrape of the spatula, the quiet tap of his fingers returning to the keyboard. Every sound felt sharp. I plated the food, sat down at the far end of the table, and ate in silence. It tasted good. Not incredible, just real, hot, enough. He didn't look at me again. That was fine, because for the first time in a long time, what settled over me wasn't anger. It was clarity. When I finished, I rinsed my plate, washed the pan, dried my hands, and walked past him. Halfway out of the kitchen, I stopped. "You're right," I said. He looked up. "About what?" I met his eyes. "I should take care of myself." He gave a careless shrug and turned back to his screen. Exactly. He thought the conversation ended there. He thought he had made his point and won. What he didn't realize was that something had already shifted, quietly, deep enough that by the next morning, I was already changing the way I lived in that house. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. That almost never happened after a 14-hour shift. Usually my body fought for every extra minute, but that morning, my eyes opened in the dark and stayed open. I lay there for a few seconds listening. The house was silent. Adrian was still asleep beside me, breathing evenly like the night before had been nothing. I stared at the ceiling. "You're an adult. Cook for yourself." "I don't run a restaurant." The lines replayed in my head, but they didn't sting the same way anymore. They had hardened into instruction. Fine, I thought. I got out of bed quietly, pulled on a sweatshirt and leggings, grabbed my keys, and left before sunrise. The grocery store was nearly empty. The door slid open with a soft mechanical sigh. Cold air touched my skin. The place smelled like produce mist, stale coffee, and floor cleaner. I took a cart and moved slowly through the aisles. Eggs, chicken, rice, potatoes, vegetables, bread, fruit, spices. Nothing elaborate, just food, real food. The kind that keeps you standing through a long day. The kind that says somebody planned ahead. At the register, the cashier looked half awake and polite. I loaded the bags into my truck and drove home while the sky began to lighten. When I walked back inside, the house was still quiet. For a moment, I stood in the kitchen with both grocery bags in my hands and looked around. Same counters, same cabinets, same sink, but it didn't feel the same. The night before, I had walked in hungry and disappointed. This time I walked in carrying something steadier than hope. Decision. I unpacked everything carefully, organized the fridge, stacked containers in the pantry, then started breakfast. Eggs in one pan, potatoes in another, bread in the toaster. The smell spread through the kitchen, warm and steady. Oil crackled. The toaster clicked. Steam rose off the potatoes. By the time I plated the food, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Adrian walked in, wearing sleep pants and a t-shirt, hair still messy, one hand rubbing the back of his neck. He stopped when he saw the groceries on the counter. "What are you doing?" "Making breakfast." His eyes moved from the pan to the shopping bags. "You went shopping?" "Yes." He frowned. "Why?" "Because we needed food." He leaned against the doorway and crossed his arms. "Well," he said with a small smirk, "look at you." I glanced up. "What does that mean?" "Nothing, it's just funny." "What is?" "You suddenly acting like a chef." I slid the potatoes onto my plate and sat down. "I'm feeding myself." He watched me for a second. The kitchen smelled good, and he noticed. Then came the question. "Did you make any for me?" I looked at him, not angrily, not dramatically, just directly. "No." His eyebrows lifted. For a second, he looked genuinely confused, like my answer didn't match the version of me he was used to. "Wow," he said quietly. I picked up my fork. "You're an adult." The silence that followed turned thin and sharp. His mouth tightened. Maybe because the words were his. Maybe because hearing them back made them sound exactly as cold as they were. Eventually, he opened the fridge, stared into it, grabbed a yogurt, and shut the door harder than necessary. I kept eating. The eggs were soft. The potatoes had crisp edges. The toast was still warm enough to steam when I tore it open. He stood at the counter, yogurt in hand, not opening it. "You're seriously doing this?" he asked. I swallowed and set down my fork. "Doing what?" "This." I looked at him calmly, taking care of myself. He gave a short laugh through his nose, but there was irritation under it now. "You're proving a point over breakfast?" "No," I said, "I'm adjusting." His expression flickered. Not guilt. Not yet. Just discomfort. He was starting to understand that I had heard him, really heard him, and that I was no longer going to soften what he meant just to keep peace in the house. He left the kitchen without another word. That should have felt like a victory. It didn't. It felt like confirmation. That was how the new routine began. I stopped waiting for shared meals. I started packing my own lunches before work. Rice, chicken, vegetables, sometimes sandwiches, sometimes leftovers. I bought glass containers, made grocery lists, figured out which meals held up best after long shifts. Most importantly, I stopped asking. I didn't ask if he wanted anything from the store. I didn't ask whether he had eaten. I didn't ask what he wanted for dinner. I stepped out of the expectation that care would naturally move both ways. By the end of the first week, I felt lighter. Not happier exactly, just less drained. Once I stopped spending energy being disappointed, I realized how much of my life had been built around waiting for him to notice, include, soften, respond. The house looked different without that fog over it. I noticed how often he left his glass on the coffee table and somehow expected it to end up in the sink. How packages arrived for him more often than bills. How he only cared what was for dinner when whatever I was making smelled especially good. The first time he tried it, I was at the stove making lemon garlic chicken. He walked in, glanced at the pan, and said, "That smells good." "It is," I said. He waited. I knew he was waiting. Then he opened the fridge and asked, "So what are we doing for dinner?" I turned one piece of chicken, lowered the heat, and answered without looking at him. "I'm having chicken, rice, and green beans." A beat passed. "And me?" I set down the tongs and finally looked at him. "I don't know, Adrian. You're an adult." He stared at me while the pan hissed between us. "You're being petty." "No," I said. "I'm being consistent." That made his jaw flex. He hated that word. Because consistent meant this wasn't a mood, not a performance, not something that would disappear once he waited me out. It meant the ground under us had shifted. He scoffed and walked away. 20 minutes later, I heard the microwave running. The next week, he ordered takeout twice. Then 3 times the week after that. Containers piled up in the trash. Delivery charges landed on the counter. Half-eaten meals got shoved into the fridge because buying food and planning your life are not the same thing. I said nothing. I just kept cooking for myself. And the stranger it became for him, the calmer it became for me. One Saturday morning, I was slicing strawberries into oatmeal when he wandered into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "You've changed," he said. I sprinkled cinnamon over the top. "I know." He folded his arms. "Ever since that night." I took my bowl to the table and sat down. "Yes." He watched me as if waiting for more. There wasn't any. Finally, he said, "You're making everything weird." I looked up at him. "No, I'm just not pretending anymore." That was the first time I saw uncertainty move across his face. Small but real. Because none of this was really about food. It was about what food had exposed. Effort. Care. The quiet assumption that I would keep carrying more and calling it normal. Now that I had stepped out of that pattern, he could feel the absence of it everywhere. In the kitchen. At the table. In the silence between us. And even though he still didn't understand how far I was willing to take that change, he had started to realize something important. This wasn't passing. The gym started almost by accident. The first time I went because I didn't want to go straight home. Work had been long again. Not 14 hours, but enough to leave that familiar heaviness in my back and shoulders. I sat in my truck outside the house for a minute, engine off, staring at the front door. Nothing inside was waiting for me. That realization didn't hurt the way it had at first. It just took away the urgency to walk in. So instead of reaching for the handle, I reached for my phone, searched for the nearest gym, and drove there without giving myself time to reconsider. The place smelled like rubber mats and metal. Weights clinked, machines hummed, music moved faintly through overhead speakers. It wasn't quiet, but it was focused. Everyone there was doing something for themselves. No one was waiting to be managed. No one was waiting to be carried. I signed up at the front desk. That first night, I stayed 20 minutes. Treadmill, light weights, just enough to wake my muscles up in a way work never did. When I left, there was sweat on my skin and something else under it. Relief. The next day, I went back. Then again the day after that. 20 minutes turned into 40. 40 turned into an hour. I learned the rhythm of the place, when it was crowded, when it was quiet, which machines were always open, how far to push without burning out. And slowly, my body stopped feeling like something I dragged through the day and started feeling like something I actually belonged in again. The strangest part was this: I wasn't as tired anymore. Work was still hard. The hours were still long, but the exhaustion didn't sit as deep. My mind felt clearer, my reactions steadier, like something inside me had stopped bracing for disappointment before I even walked through the door. One evening, as I tied my shoes near the entryway, Adrian looked up from the couch. "Where are you going?" "The gym." "You've been going a lot." "Yes." I stood, grabbed my keys. He watched me for a second. "That new routine thing?" I glanced at him. "Taking care of myself." His mouth tightened. He didn't say anything else, but I saw the look on his face. Confusion, irritation, something else underneath both, something not fully formed yet. I left before it could turn into words. The more I built that routine, the clearer everything else became. Not louder, just clearer. I started noticing how much of my life had once been organized around anticipating him, timing meals around when he might be hungry, leaving room in conversations for him to step in or shut down, adjusting my tone so small things wouldn't become tension. None of it had felt dramatic while I was living it. It was just hundreds of small adjustments, small enough to excuse, small enough to overlook. But once I stopped making them, the silence they left behind felt clean. A few weeks into that new rhythm, something shifted again. Subtle, but obvious enough that even Adrian couldn't ignore it. I came home one night, set my gym bag down, and walked into the kitchen. He was already there, standing in front of the stove, holding a spatula like it didn't quite belong in his hand. There was a pan on the burner, something in it, a little overdone, uneven. The smell was acceptable. I paused in the doorway. He didn't look at me right away. "I made dinner," he said. I waited, for both of us. That part came slower, like he had to decide whether he wanted to say it. I stepped inside and set my keys on the counter. "Okay." He finally turned. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen in a while. Not warmth. Not exactly. Effort. It looked unfamiliar on him. I thought... He stopped, then tried again. "I thought we could eat together." The words hung there. For a second, I could almost see the version of me from a month earlier. The one who would have felt relieved, grateful, ready to smooth everything over because an effort had finally appeared. But that version of me wasn't here anymore. Not in the same way. I walked past him, opened the fridge, and took out the container I had prepped the night before. Chicken, rice, vegetables. He watched me. "You already made food?" "Yes." "For tonight?" "Yes." He frowned. "So you're not going to eat this?" I closed the fridge and looked at the pan on the stove. "I didn't ask you to make anything for me." The sentence landed harder than I meant it to. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. His grip tightened on the spatula. I was trying to do something nice. I nodded once. "I can see that." "That's it? What do you want me to say?" His jaw shifted. "I don't know, maybe thank you?" I held his gaze. "Thank you." He blinked. But the room didn't soften. Because gratitude without expectation feels different. Lighter. More distant. He turned back to the stove and flipped something in the pan a little too hard. I reheated my food, set my plate down, and sat at the table. We ate in the same room, for the first time in weeks, but it didn't feel like before. There was no shared rhythm, no attempt to bridge the space between us, just two people eating different meals at the same table. Halfway through, he set down his fork. "This isn't how it's supposed to be." I looked up. "How is it supposed to be?" "You know what I mean." "No," I said, "I don't." He exhaled sharply. "We're supposed to be together. We are in the same room." "That's not what I meant." I took another bite, swallowed, and answered quietly. "Then be more specific." That frustrated him more than an argument would have, because I wasn't giving him anything to push against. No anger, no tears, no reaction he could twist into proof that I was the problem. Just facts, calm ones. And calm, when someone is used to having control, feels a lot like distance. He leaned back in his chair. "You're acting like everything's fine." I shook my head. "No, I'm acting like I understand it now." "Understand what?" I met his eyes. "How this works." He didn't ask me to explain. Maybe because part of him already knew. A few days later, I noticed something else. Small but telling. His takeout orders started slowing down. Not because he had become responsible overnight. Because he was watching me. Watching how I moved through the house. How I planned things. How I stopped asking. Stopped waiting. Stopped adjusting. One evening, he opened the fridge and stared at the containers lined up inside. "Did you make all of this?" "Yes." "For the week?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. Then, almost like he hadn't meant to say it out loud, he said, "That's a lot of effort." I closed the cabinet I was organizing. "It's basic." He looked at me. For a second, there was something close to realization in his face, like he was beginning to understand that what he had dismissed before was never small. It had only been invisible to him, because I had made it look easy. And once something invisible becomes visible, you can't stop seeing it. But understanding doesn't always create change. Sometimes it only creates discomfort. And discomfort, when it sits too long, turns into something else. The money part came later. Not because it wasn't important, because it had always been quiet enough to miss. It started on a Tuesday night with no argument attached to it. I was at the table with my laptop open, going through bank statements the way I had done 100 times before. Just checking numbers, making sure everything lined up. At first, nothing stood out. Mortgage, utilities, internet, subscriptions, groceries, normal. Then I slowed down. Not because something looked wrong, because something felt off. I scrolled back another month, then another, and that was when I saw it. Not a mistake, a pattern. Every major expense was coming out of my account. Mortgage, electricity, water, internet, insurance, even his car payment. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to remember when it had shifted that far. There was no clear answer, no conversation where we agreed to it, no single decision. It had just happened the same way everything else had happened. Gradually, quietly. We had been living together long enough that bills had blurred together, and I had let that blur stay in place because it was easier than stopping to question it. At first, it had made sense. I earned more in certain seasons. Covering more for a little while hadn't seemed like a problem. Then, for a little while, became normal. Then invisible. Until suddenly it wasn't shared anymore. It was mine. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. Not angry. Not shocked. Just aware. It matched everything else. The food. The effort. The expectation. The quiet assumption that I would keep covering the difference because I always had. I closed the laptop halfway, then opened it again. No hesitation this time. I went through everything carefully. Separated what was mine from what should have been his. Untangled bills. Moved subscriptions. Disconnected his car payment from my account. And put clear lines where everything had been allowed to blur. It took less than an hour. That was the part that stayed with me. Something that had drifted out of balance over years only took an hour to correct. I shut the laptop and sat there in the quiet kitchen. The house looked the same, but underneath it, something had shifted again. Deeper this time, more permanent. He noticed 2 weeks later. That was how long it took for the consequences to reach him. I was in the living room when he walked in holding his card. Did something happen to this? I looked up. Yes. What do you mean, yes? It's not connected to my account anymore. There was a short pause, just long enough for the meaning to land. You removed it. Yes. His expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Shock. Why? I held his gaze. Because you're an adult. The room went still. For a second, it was like he didn't recognize the sentence, even though it was his. You know that's not the same thing, he said. How? You know what I mean. No, I said calmly. I don't. He ran a hand through his hair and paced once across the room. This is different. Explain it to me. That's money. Bills, responsibilities. Yes, and food isn't? He stopped. The silence stretched. I didn't feel it, because for the first time, he was the one trying to catch up to something that had already moved past him. You're overreacting, he said finally. No. His voice sharpened. You are. You're turning one comment into... It wasn't one comment. That was the first time I interrupted him. Not loudly, but clearly. He went quiet. It was a pattern, I said. You just said it out loud. He stared at me like he was deciding whether to argue harder or think harder. He chose neither. He went defensive instead. So what, now we're separating everything? I already did. That's not how relationships work. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because I had heard a version of that before. Different words. Same meaning. I tilted my head. I thought that's not how life works. His jaw tightened. He hated hearing his own logic turned around on him. It stripped away the comfort and left the selfishness underneath it exposed. This is petty, he said. No, I said, this is balanced. Another silence. He looked at me differently now. Not confused. Not irritated. Calculating. Because this wasn't about dinner anymore. It wasn't about habits or routines. It was about control, and he could feel it shifting. You should have talked to me, he said. I just did. That's not what I mean. I know. He looked away. For a second, it seemed like he might finally say something real, something honest, something that admitted what had actually been happening between us. He didn't. He defaulted to the easiest line instead. That's not fair. I let that sit there. Then I said, it wasn't fair before either. That landed. He didn't argue with it. He just stood there, holding the card in his hand like it had become heavier. And for the first time since all of this started, I saw it clearly. He wasn't upset because things had changed. He was upset because they had changed without his permission. Because the system that had worked in his favor no longer existed. And he hadn't been the one to decide that. Later that night, I heard him in the kitchen opening cabinets, closing drawers, moving things around, trying to figure things out. I stayed where I was. Didn't help. Didn't step in. Didn't rescue him from a reality I had been carrying for a long time. Because this part wasn't mine anymore. 3 months after that night in the kitchen, the house didn't feel the same. Nothing had moved. Same couch, same table, same light falling through the windows in the late afternoon. But the energy had shifted. Before, everything in that house bent quietly toward him. Now, nothing did. And he felt it. At first, it showed up in small ways. Groceries that didn't magically restock. Bills that arrived with his name on them. Meals that required planning instead of expectation. He tried to ignore it, then work around it, then react to it. The complaints came in pieces. "This is getting expensive," he muttered one night, staring at a takeout receipt. I didn't look up from my plate. It always was. He glanced at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're noticing it now." That irritated him. Not enough for a full argument. Just enough to sharpen the air. Another time, he opened the fridge and frowned at the containers lined up neatly on one side. "You made all of this again?" "Yes." "For the whole week?" "Yes." He shook his head. "That's a lot." "It's normal." He looked like he wanted to say something else. Something bigger. He didn't. Not yet. The tension didn't explode. It built. Slow, steady pressure. The shift came one evening. I had just gotten back from the gym. My hair was still slightly damp. My bag slipped off my shoulder as I stepped into the living room. Adrian was already there. Not sitting. Not distracted. Standing. Waiting. I paused. "What?" He crossed his arms. "We need to talk." I nodded. "Okay." That threw him off. He had expected resistance, emotion, something to push against. Instead, he got space. We moved into the living room, sat across from each other. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said it. "You've changed." I held his gaze. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "I don't like it." The words sat between us. Clear, not loud. "That's okay," I said. His expression shifted immediately. "What does that mean?" "It means I didn't change for you." Silence. Real silence. The kind that forces something underneath it to surface. He leaned forward slightly. "So what, this is how it's going to be now? We're just, what, roommates?" I tilted my head. "We already were." That landed harder than anything else I'd said, because it wasn't dramatic. It was accurate. He leaned back slowly, like the words had pushed him. "That's not true." "Isn't it? We're together." "Are we?" The question didn't need force, because for the first time, he didn't have an immediate answer. I watched it happen. The hesitation. The flicker. The realization trying to form and being pushed away. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said finally. "No," I said. "I'm just not minimizing it anymore." That hit. I could see it in the way his fingers tightened against his arm, in the way he exhaled through his nose, in the way he looked away for a second before forcing himself back. "So what do you want?" he asked. That question would have meant everything to me before. Now it felt late. "I'm already doing it," I said. "Doing what?" "Taking care of myself." "That's not an answer." "It is." He shook his head. "No, it's not. That's not how relationships work." There it was again. Softer now. Less certain. Like even he didn't fully believe it. I leaned back slightly. "Then how do they work?" He opened his mouth. Paused. Closed it. Because the answer was simple. Too simple. "They're supposed to be equal," he said finally. I nodded. "Yes. And this isn't that." I held his gaze. "You're right." That caught him off guard. He blinked. "It's not equal." He leaned forward slightly, thinking he had found something solid. "Exactly." I didn't move. It wasn't equal before either. That took it away again. The room went quiet, and this time he didn't try to fill it, because anything he said would circle back to the same place. The same imbalance, the same pattern, the same truth. I watched his expression shift, slowly, from frustration to confusion to something heavier, awareness. Not complete, not comfortable, but there. "You're really not going to go back to how things were," he said. Not a question. A realization. "No." The word landed softly, but it stayed. He sat there for a long moment, then leaned back, running a hand over his face. And just like that, the fight left him. Not because he agreed, because he understood enough. Enough to know this wasn't something he could argue his way out of. That the shift had already happened. That whatever came next wasn't going to be decided by him alone anymore. 6 months after that night, the house was quiet. Not tense, not waiting, just quiet. The decision didn't come all at once. There was no explosion, no final fight, no moment that forced everything into the open. It came the way everything else had. Slowly, clearly, unavoidably. At first, we tried to keep things familiar. We moved through the same rooms, shared the same space, but nothing connected anymore. No shared rhythm, no expectation, no effort stretching across the gap. Just two people living separate lives in the same place. One night, I came home later than usual. The gym had run long. My muscles ached in that steady, earned way I had grown used to. When I opened the door, the house felt still. Adrian was on the couch. The TV was on low. He didn't look up right away. I set my keys down, took off my shoes, and walked into the kitchen. The fridge was full. Containers lined up. Everything in its place. Mine. I took one out, heated it, and sat at the table. Halfway through the meal, he spoke. "I've been thinking." I looked up. "Okay." He turned his head slightly, finally meeting my eyes. "This isn't working." No anger. No accusation. Just truth. I nodded. "I know." That was it. No argument. No attempt to fix it, because there was nothing left to fix. The version of us that could have been fixed had existed months earlier, before the pattern became clear, before the balance shifted, before I stopped rewriting reality to make it easier to stay. Now there was only clarity. And clarity doesn't negotiate. We separated the following week, quietly, logistically. Boxes, paperwork, schedules. No dramatic goodbyes. No last-minute confessions. No sudden change. Because the realization had already happened. We were just catching up to it. The day he moved out, the house felt different immediately. Not emptier, lighter, like something heavy had been sitting in the air for a long time and was finally gone. I stood in the kitchen that evening, leaning against the counter, looking around. Same cabinets, same table, same light through the window. But everything felt like mine in a way it hadn't before. Not because I claimed it, because I wasn't sharing it with someone who didn't see me inside it. I opened the fridge. Full, organized, intentional. I cooked dinner the way I always did now. Simple, steady, enough. And when I sat down at the table, the silence didn't press in. It settled. These days, my life is quiet. I still work long shifts. That didn't change, but I did. I don't sit in the driveway anymore wondering what I'm walking into. I just go inside. The kitchen smells like real food. The fridge is full. The space feels calm. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not waiting for someone else to complete the day. Sometimes I still think about that night, about the way he said it so casually. You're an adult. Cook for yourself. He meant it as dismissal, distance, a way to push responsibility away. But he was right, just not in the way he thought. Because the moment I actually listened, everything changed.